Pleasure to meet y'all at last, and welcome back to films I should have talked about years ago. And right now, let's just go and do some more stuff because I still got quite a long path I need to go down here before I'm even close to being finished with all of this. So with that in mind, let's just continue on by simply talking about yet another big film out there, one that I've been dying to talk about for quite a while now, known as Osmosis Jones. Yeah. This was released in August 2001 and features Bill Murray, Chris Rock, and Lawrence Fishburne. But the way I see it, it's a bit more than just a simple pleasure of having a nice fine cast with many whom we know about very well. It is in fact a bit of a tale, a combination of live action and animation that goes together to tell us a little bit about the human body and how it technically works. The way that the producers here were wanting to go with this is that they were trying to give us a bit of a lesson on health and what could happen to you if you don't do it right. And throughout the early 2000s, there have been tons of campaigns relating to health and safety relating to others, especially with the midst of the obesity epidemic becoming an extreme level of danger upon society. By 2004, with the documentary film Super Size Me by Morgan Spurlock, it did become clear that eventually we would be facing an extreme level of health crises unlike anything else that we could have ever imagined. Osmosis Jones was just one of the tiny baby steps that was necessary to accomplish a huge stride in order to obtain the kind of information that we were looking for. The breakthrough that we could have actually gotten a hold of decades ago, but yet we just weren't quite there yet. But it's also important to note that with a film like Osmosis Jones, it's one of the many culminations of live action and animation being blended together, though being a bit late. There were tons of great examples out there relating to live action animation being blended well, very nicely. Like Who Framed Roger Rabbit and Space Jam, for example, those of which both came many years before then. But Osmosis Jones, despite being a bit of a late bloomer in this exact sort of culmination of American cinema, it still does hold off pretty well as being a bit of an underrated masterpiece, according to many fans of it to this very day. I, of course, was one of millions of people who first got to know about the film thanks to lessons in science and health classes. As a matter of fact, the first time I ever watched this film in full was at my 8th grade science course back in early 2014. Yeah, this was months before I graduated from middle school and eventually moved on to high school, but before that even happened, we had a lot of things we needed to do here. And in terms of science at the time, there were plenty of subjects that we were able to go through, including health and genetics, during the first to last few months of the last quarter of the entire semester. But aside from that, I was in fact able to eventually get around to watching it in full on my own terms, especially with the help of various social media and streaming accounts, like Netflix and HBO Max. Of course, Osmosis Jones is now out there on HBO Max, free for anyone who does in fact want to watch the film in full. But aside from all that, I really gotta say, this is in fact quite an amazing film in general. Chris Rock's hilarious African-American antics are just astoundingly beautiful. It certainly does kind of remind me of the kind of things that some actors like Eddie Murphy and Chris Tucker way back then were able to accomplish so well. We also gotta like the kind of thing that Lawrence Fishburne has, that sort of dark, grisly, distinctive, evil tone that lies within. Of course, that's a tradition that still carries on to this very day because Fishburne is still alive and well at 60 years old right now. Yeah, so the timing is perfect. Of course, I was able to see Fishburne in a bunch of other films since then, like Where'd You Go, Bernadette, The Ice Road, which I've already talked a bit about here on films I should have talked about years ago, as a bit of a bonus episode. And not to mention the John Wick trilogy, which is about to turn into a quadrilogy next year. But whether Fishburne is the Bowery King, whether Fishburne is, well, most other roles, it still is fair to say that this guy has quite a knack for being that sort of guy, on film or otherwise. But you also gotta admit, the same old Dr. Peter Venkman sort of sarcasm that Bill Murray still does exude to this very day, the sort of hilarity that you can possibly get out of Murray, it's just amazing. I mean, considering how Murray was in fact brought on to the live action portions of the film in comparison to the majority of the other members of the cast, I'd say Murray pulls it off quite well. The story of the film, though, is what's very convincing to this very day. It simply goes like this. You have a white blood cell who for some reason is colored blue. I don't really get why that happened there. But anyways, Osmosis Jones, a rookie cop inside the city of Frank, ends up trying to basically get to the very top of the ranks. But is basically just patrolling the mouth after Bill Murray's character, Frank, ends up eating an egg that was dropped on the ground. Oh man, that is freaking disgusting. But it gets even better from then on out. The egg apparently contained a virus based off of anthrax. Yeah, literally. An egg containing the virus anthrax. But Thrax, as this film is basically referring to this antagonist, ends up attempting to pretty much kill off Frank by giving Frank an extremely high fever that would eventually become lethal. But Osmosis Jones ends up coming in to save the day by defeating Anthrax and pretty much getting the hypothalamus back in check, leaving Frank once again alive and well. But after all that, well, Frank ends up changing and goes along to bond with the child. Man, that's quite a premise right then and there. There's plenty of other details in there, including the incident that happened a few years prior where Osmosis tries to flush out toxins and the like by causing Frank to vomit. Man, that alone is disgusting. But again, let's not forget the fact that this right here still does have a lot of unique tropes. Aside from the usage of live action and animation at the same time as a way to incorporate both of the different cast members' actions that happen inside and outside the body, it still is important to note that this film actually was a relative success. So much so that, well, there was actually a spin-off series simply titled Ozzy and Drix, where Drixinol, apparently a pill who comes in to help Osmosis Jones in the film, ends up making a return in this series. And in all honesty, last month, July 2021, was basically a time where I got to revisit a lot of things from the past. I was able to watch a lot of older cartoons, many which were obscured or not very well known at the time. Even to this day, they still are things that nobody's ever heard of. But the truth is, I've seen several episodes of Ozzy and Drix last month, and you know what? I really gotta say, for a series that continues on after the lore of the film has left off, the fact is that, well, Ozzy and Drix, or Osmosis Jones and Drixinol, if you really want to get that far onto it, end up getting transferred from the city of Frank to the city of Hector, a younger body who's much more healthier and who's therefore much more prone to certain viruses, bacteria, parasites, and other sorts of deadly organisms. But of course, it's just like with many other series out there. Every episode has its premise, much like with what the movie gave us, but of course, it's basically formatted to fit into a 20-minute long episode, along with an intro and end credits. But nonetheless, this series is probably very underrated, much like the film itself. So that pretty much just goes to show that with a lot of things out there, even to this very day, there still is the likelihood that any kind of success could in fact turn into a spin-off series or other sort of media out there. Of course, it was very common back then, not so much nowadays. And it's probably because most filmmakers out there are trying to not spend as much money as many others have. So in terms of giving this film a score, of all films out there that I've had the pleasure to talk about here, on films I should have talked about years ago, a film from 2001, exactly 20 years old nowadays, yet another case where the timing is perfect, I'd have to give this film a bit of a higher score than you might have imagined. An 8.9 out of 10. That seems to suit me just fine. 8.9 out of 10 seems fine enough, the way I see it. But, of course, let's not forget that I still am going to be having a lot of other things that I will be talking about very soon. So, with that in mind, well, that's probably just going to cut it for right now. But if you want to see more, go down to my channel, then make sure that you like, subscribe, comment, follow me on social media, and stay on the Hollywood side.